The morning frost crunched beneath Italian leather shoes that had once walked red carpets and boardroom floors with confidence. Now they carried a ghost through Greenwood Cemetery, past weathered headstones and forgotten dreams, toward the one grave that held his entire universe. Michael Platt, 35 years old and worth $50 million, knelt before a piece of polished granite as if it were an altar. Catherine Elizabeth Platt, he whispered to the carved letters, his breath forming clouds in the December air. Beloved wife, taken too soon at 32. The words had become a prayer, a ritual, a lifeline to sanity in a world that had lost all meaning. 1 year, 365 days since cancer had stolen his soulmate, his partner, his reason for breathing. The doctors had tried everything: chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments that cost more than most people's houses. Michael had liquidated investments, mortgaged properties, and spent endless nights researching miracle cures on the internet. Money meant nothing when measured against Catherine's laughter, her touch, her way of making him feel invincible. But cancer didn't care about love or wealth or desperate prayers. It took her piece by piece, smile by smile, until the woman who had lit up every room became a shadow of herself. In her final moments, as machines beeped their mechanical symphony of failing life, Catherine had squeezed his hand with what little strength remained. "Don't stop living because I'm gone," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital's hum. "Promise me, Michael. Promise me you'll find happiness again." He had promised through tears, meaning every word in that sterile room. But promises made to the dying, Michael had discovered, were easier to make than keep. The cemetery groundskeeper, an elderly man named Frank, who had grown accustomed to Michael's daily visits, approached with measured steps. "Morning, Mr. Platt. You're here earlier than usual." Michael didn't look up from the grave, couldn't sleep. Again. Frank nodded with understanding born from watching countless grievers pass through these gates. "Your wife, she was something special, wasn't she? I remember her from the wedding photos you showed me." A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's face. Catherine in her wedding dress, radiant and laughing as she smeared cake on his nose during their reception. She had been everything he wasn't: spontaneous where he was calculated, warm where he was reserved, optimistic where he saw obstacles. She had transformed his sterile bachelor existence into something magical. "She made me better," Michael said, finally standing and brushing dirt from his knees. "Without her, I'm just grieving," Frank finished gently. "But you're still here, son. That has to count for something." None on the impossible task of managing his increasingly erratic schedule. But the call he dreaded most came as he pulled into his driveway. "Michael, we need to talk." His brother David's voice carried that familiar tone of forced patience mixed with barely concealed frustration. "Patricia and I are coming over." "I'm not in the mood for company, David. That's exactly why we're coming. This has gone on long enough." The Platt family mansion sat on 5 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds overlooking Lake Washington. Catherine had fallen in love with the house first, dragging him through room after room, her eyes sparkling with visions of dinner parties and holiday gatherings. They had planned to fill those rooms with children's laughter, to grow old together watching sunsets from the wraparound porch. Now the house felt like a mausoleum, its 23 rooms echoing with memories that cut like glass. David arrived within the hour, his wife Patricia in tow, both wearing expressions of grim determination. At 38, David shared Michael's dark hair and sharp features, but lacked his younger brother's intensity. Where Michael had channeled his brilliance into revolutionary technology, David had chosen the safer path of real estate development, building suburban neighborhoods with methodical precision. "You look terrible," Patricia announced without preamble, her designer clothes and perfect makeup a stark contrast to Michael's rumpled appearance. She had never liked Catherine, considering her too common for the Platt family's ambitions, and her barely concealed relief at being widow-free had poisoned any relationship with Michael. "Patricia," David warned, then turned to his brother. "Mike, you can't keep living like this. When's the last time you showered? Ate a real meal? Went to the office?" Michael sank into Catherine's favourite armchair, a overstuffed monstrosity she had rescued from a thrift shop and reupholstered in cheerful yellow fabric. "The company runs itself. I hired good people. Good people who are starting to wonder if their CEO has completely lost it," Patricia interjected. "The board is asking questions, Michael. Investors are nervous. You can't run a $50 million company from a cemetery. Maybe I don't want to run it anymore." The words hung in the air like a confession. David and Patricia exchanged glances, the quick, calculating look of people seeing opportunity in others' pain. "That's grief talking," David said carefully. "Catherine wouldn't want you to throw away everything you've built." "How would you know what Catherine wanted?" Michael's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You barely tolerated her when she was alive." Patricia's face flushed red. "That's not fair. We all cared about Catherine." "Cared enough to skip our anniversary dinner because you had a prior commitment. Cared enough to tell her she should consider a prenup when we got engaged. Cared enough to suggest she might be after my money." The accusations hit their mark. David had the grace to look ashamed, but Patricia's expression hardened into defiance. "We were protecting you. We've seen what happens when wealthy men make emotional decisions." "Emotional decisions," Michael repeated slowly. "Like marrying the woman I loved, like spending my own money trying to save her life, like grieving my wife. Like isolating yourself from everyone who cares about you," David shot back. "Look around, Mike. Really look. This isn't living, it's dying by degrees. Catherine's gone, but you're still here. What are you going to do about it?" The question that had haunted him for 12 months crystallized in the space between them. What was he going to do? Continue this daily pilgrimage to the dead? Keep wandering through rooms that held more ghosts than memories? Transform into one of those bitter old men who disappeared into their grief until the world forgot they existed? "I've been thinking about selling the company," Michael said quietly. Patricia's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "That might be for the best. You could travel, start fresh somewhere." "Give yourself time to heal," David added. But his wife's obvious excitement had revealed their true motivation. "Maybe find someone new." "There is no someone new." Michael's voice turned to ice. "There will never be someone new. Never is a long time, brother. Not long enough." After they left, Michael stood in his empty house, surrounded by 23 rooms of memories and silence. Outside, Seattle's skyline glittered with the promise of other people's dreams, other people's happiness, other people's tomorrows. But inside, in the space where his heart used to beat with purpose, there was only the endless weight of missing someone who would never come home. The phone rang again. Sarah, probably, with another crisis that required his attention. Michael let it ring, staring at a wedding photo on the mantel where Catherine's smile promised a future that cancer had stolen. Some men are buried alive, he thought again, and wondered if the dead were really the lucky ones. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in a blanket of pristine white, but no amount of snow could cover the darkness growing in Michael Platt's heart. Tomorrow, he would return to the cemetery. Tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until someone or something gave him a reason to stop. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow would change everything. Chapter 2. Miracles Wear Torn Clothes. Angels don't always descend from heaven in golden robes and blinding light. Sometimes they huddle under concrete bridges in torn jackets, clutching babies to their chest while the world tries to wash them away. The December storm attacked Seattle with biblical fury, turning streets into rivers and hope into a drowning thing. Michael Platt drove through the deluge like a man possessed, his BMW's wipers fighting a losing battle against sheets of rain that transformed the world into an impressionist nightmare of blurred lights and shadow. He had spent 4 hours at Catherine's grave, talking to marble until his voice went hoarse, begging a dead woman for answers that would never come. The cemetery groundskeeper had finally approached with an umbrella, gently suggesting that perhaps Mrs. Platt wouldn't want him catching pneumonia on her account. Now, as lightning split the sky like God's own fury, Michael drove the familiar route home through downtown Seattle, past the homeless camps that city officials pretended not to see, past the soup kitchens and shelters overflowing with societies forgotten. The storm had driven most people indoors, but those with no indoors to claim huddled wherever concrete offered shelter. That's when he saw them. Under the Interstate 5 overpass, where the sound of traffic usually drowned out the city's conscience, a figure crouched against the concrete support beam. Even through the rain-distorted windshield, Michael could see it was a young woman, her body curved protectively around something precious. She rocked back and forth in a rhythm as old as humanity itself, the universal motion of a mother trying to soothe her children. Michael pulled over without thinking, his business-trained mind cataloguing the danger of stopping in this neighborhood at night during a storm. But something deeper than logic compelled him forward, something that had been dormant for a year but suddenly roared to life. She looked up as his headlights found her, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. She couldn't have been older than 22, with the kind of striking beauty that poverty couldn't quite erase. Her dark skin glistened with rain, her hair plastered to her skull, but her eyes, dear God, her eyes held the fierce protectiveness of a lioness guarding her cubs. 2 tiny bundles were pressed against her chest, barely visible beneath a threadbare jacket that had seen better decades. Babies. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Michael killed the engine and stepped into the storm, immediately soaked to the skin. The woman's eyes widened with terror and she scrambled backward against the concrete, clutching her children tighter. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Please don't hurt us. We'll move. We'll go somewhere else." The words shattered something in Michael's chest. This young mother thought he was there to cause harm, to drive them from even this miserable shelter. What kind of world had taught her that every approaching stranger meant danger? "I'm not here to hurt you," Michael called out, raising his hands to show he was harmless. "I want to help." "We don't need help," she lied, with the desperate pride of someone who had needed help for so long that accepting it had become impossible. "We're fine." One of the babies began to cry, a thin, weak sound that spoke of hunger and cold and everything wrong with a universe that let innocence suffer. The young woman began that ancient rocking motion again, whispering soft reassurances that Michael couldn't hear but felt in his bones. "When did you last eat?" he asked, taking a careful step closer. Her eyes flicked away, answering without words. Michael could see her ribs through the torn jacket, could see the hollow spaces where flesh should have filled out her cheeks. She was starving herself to make whatever little she had last longer for her children. "My name is Michael," he said, crouching down to her level, letting the rain pound his back. "What's yours?" She studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or ulterior motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied some deep instinct, because her shoulders sagged slightly. "Alana," she whispered. "Alana Weston." "These are your babies," she nodded, adjusting the bundles in her arms. "Twins, True and Hope. They're 6 months old." 6 months. The same age Catherine had dreamed their children would be by now, if the cancer hadn't stolen that future along with everything else. Michael felt his throat close with emotion. Where's their father? Alana's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Gone. Took off when the bills got too high and reality got too real. Said he never signed up for the responsibility. How long have you been out here? 3 weeks, since we got evicted. She straightened her spine, trying to summon dignity from somewhere deep inside. I had a job at a diner, but when Hope got sick and I had to miss too many shifts, they let me go. No job means no apartment. No apartment means... She gestured at the concrete around them. Hope was sick? Pneumonia. Both of them caught it, but Hope got it worse. The emergency room saved their lives. But the bills... Alana shook her head. $22,000 for 2 nights in the hospital. Might as well have been 22 million. Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of cosmic injustice settle on his shoulders. He had spent more than that on Catherine's jewelry for their anniversary. This young woman had chosen between keeping her children alive and keeping them housed, and the system had punished her for choosing love. Alana, he said carefully, my wife died a year ago. I have a house with more rooms than I know what to do with. Will you let me help you? Fear flashed across her features again. I can't. We can't pay you anything, and I won't do anything inappropriate. Not for money, not for shelter, not for anything. The implication hit Michael like a slap. How many times had she been propositioned, cornered, forced to consider selling pieces of herself to keep her children alive? I'm not asking for anything, he said firmly. I'm offering shelter, food, and safety. Nothing more, nothing less. No strings, no expectations, no conditions except that you let me help. Why? The question came out broken, as if she'd forgotten that kindness could exist without ulterior motives. Michael looked at the 2 tiny faces barely visible in their mother's arms, at this young woman who had given everything for her children and still had more to give, at the scene of desperate love playing out under a highway bridge in the rain. Because, he said, his voice thick with emotions he thought had died with Catherine, I've forgotten what it feels like to matter to someone, and you 3 look like you could use someone to matter to you. The silence stretched between them, filled only by rain and distant traffic and the sound of 2 babies breathing in their sleep. Finally, Alana nodded. Just for tonight, she whispered, until the storm passes. Michael smiled for the first time in a year. Just for tonight. The drive to his mansion was surreal, this young mother and her babies filling his empty car with life he'd forgotten existed. Alana stared out the window at the passing wealth of his neighborhood with wide eyes, clutching her children as if she expected to be ejected at any moment. When they pulled up to his house, 23 rooms of architectural perfection sitting on 5 acres of manicured grounds, she actually gasped. You live here? Alone. Alone, Michael confirmed and heard the words full weight for the first time. As he helped her from the car, shielding her and the babies from the rain with his jacket, something stirred in his chest that he'd thought had been buried with Catherine. Not love, it was too soon for that, but purpose. For the first time in a year, someone needed him. For the first time in a year, he mattered. Inside his empty mansion, as Alana Weston stood dripping in his marble foyer while her baby slept against her chest, Michael Platt felt the first crack in the ice that had encased his heart. He had no idea that this moment, this choice to stop, to care, to matter, would define the rest of his life. Chapter 3. Love Blooms in Broken Soil, 2005 to 2009. Healing doesn't arrive like lightning, sudden and brilliant. It seeps in slowly like morning light through curtains, so gentle you don't notice until the darkness has already begun to retreat. The first night, Michael gave Alana and the twins the guest suite on the second floor, complete with a sitting room and private bathroom that was larger than most apartments. He had expected them to be gone by morning, vanished like a beautiful dream that couldn't survive daylight's harsh reality. Instead, he woke to something he hadn't heard in his house for over a year: laughter. Following the sound downstairs, he found Alana in his kitchen, wearing one of Catherine's old robes that hung loose on her smaller frame, attempting to operate his professional-grade espresso machine, while True babbled from a makeshift high chair, and Hope clapped her tiny hands at the chaos. "I'm sorry," Alana said, flustered, as foam erupted from the machine like a caffeinated volcano. "I was trying to make coffee to say thank you, but this thing is like rocket science." Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled, but one tugged at his lips as he surveyed the destruction. "It took me 3 months to figure it out, and I have an engineering degree." "You're an engineer?" "Computer engineer. I design cloud computing infrastructure." He moved to shut off the machine before it achieved full rebellion. "What about you?" "Before everything. I was studying to be a teacher, early childhood education at Seattle University." Her voice carried the weight of abandoned dreams. "Had to drop out when I got pregnant. Then when their father left." She shrugged, but Michael caught the flash of pain across her features. Over the following weeks, as winter deepened into January 2005, the arrangement that was supposed to last one night stretched into something neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Alana insisted on earning her keep, transforming his sterile mansion into something resembling a home. She cooked meals that filled the house with warmth, organized his chaotic office, and somehow convinced his neglected plants to bloom again. But it was watching her with True and Hope that cracked something fundamental in Michael's chest. At 7 months old, the twins were beginning to develop personalities. True was the explorer, constantly attempting to crawl toward dangerous objects with single-minded determination, while Hope was the observer, studying the world with serious dark eyes that seemed to catalogue everything. Alana moved between them like a graceful dancer, anticipating needs before they were voiced, turning potential disasters into games. "You're a natural," Michael told her one evening as she rocked Hope to sleep while True played with blocks at her feet. "You have to be when you're all they have," she replied softly. "Their father never held them, not once. Said babies were women's work. He was an idiot." Alana looked up, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "Most men feel that way. Most men are idiots too." For the first time since he'd known her, Alana laughed, not the bitter sound he'd heard under the bridge, but something light and musical that made the babies look up in delight. The sound went straight to Michael's heart, like an arrow finding its target. By spring 2005, when True and Hope were taking their first tentative steps, Michael had stopped pretending this was temporary. He converted one of his unused rooms into a proper nursery, complete with matching cribs, a changing station, and more toys than 2 babies could use in a lifetime. When Alana protested the expense, he simply said, "They need a real home." "This isn't our home, Michael. We're guests here." "Then stop being guests." The conversation hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. But something shifted that day, some invisible barrier crumbling like ice in sunlight. Summer brought new milestones. True's first word was up, which he used to demand constant elevation from any available adult. Hope's was book, pointing at the volumes Michael read to them every night. Alana enrolled in online courses to finish her degree, studying at the kitchen table while the twins napped, her face illuminated by laptop light and determination. Michael found himself looking forward to coming home from work, something that had been impossible during his year of grief. The house that had felt like a tomb now rang with children's voices and Alana's soft singing. She had a way of humming while she worked, old gospel songs her grandmother had taught her, melodies that seemed to bless the very air. It was in September 2006, when True and Hope were learning to run with the fearless abandon of 2-year-olds, that Michael realized he was in love. The revelation came during a moment of domestic chaos. Hope had somehow gotten into Alana's makeup and painted both herself and True with lipstick while their mother was folding laundry. Instead of anger, Alana had dissolved into giggles, scooping up both children and dancing around the living room, leaving red lip prints on their cheeks while they squealed with delight. Michael stood in the doorway watching this scene of perfect imperfection and felt his world tilt on its axis. This wasn't the careful, mature love he'd shared with Catherine, built on compatibility and shared goals and rational decisions. This was something wilder, more desperate, the kind of love that grew from shared battles and quiet moments and the gradual realization that someone had become essential to your breathing. But loving Alana meant navigating the minefield of guilt and loyalty to Catherine's memory, the fear of betraying the woman who would always hold part of his heart, and the terror of opening himself to loss again. Alana seemed to sense his internal struggle. She had a way of watching him with those serious, dark eyes, reading emotions he didn't even know he was broadcasting. One evening in late 2006, as they sat on the couch watching True and Hope play with blocks, she finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Tell me about her. About Catherine." Michael tensed, but something in Alana's voice, gentle, curious, without jealousy, made him speak. She was sunlight. Everything bright and optimistic and good about the world. She made me laugh when I took myself too seriously, pushed me to take risks when I would have played it safe. "You loved her very much." "I did. I do." He looked at Alana, needing her to understand. "That won't ever change." "I wouldn't want it to," she said softly. "Love doesn't diminish when you share it. It multiplies." The simplicity of her wisdom broke something loose in Michael's chest. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, he found Alana in the kitchen making tea. "I don't know how to do this," he said without preamble. "Do what?" "Love someone again. Love you." The words felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and liberating at once. Alana set down her mug, turned to face him fully. "You don't have to know how. You just have to be willing to try." Their first kiss tasted like tea and tears, and the promise of tomorrow. It was tentative, careful, loaded with the weight of everything they'd both lost and everything they might find together. By Christmas 2007, when True and Hope were 3 years old and calling Michael Daddy without prompting, the question wasn't whether they were a family, but whether they were ready to make it official. The proposal came not with diamonds and fanfare, but on a Tuesday morning when Hope was sick with flu and True refused to eat anything except crackers, and Alana handled the chaos with such grace that Michael was overwhelmed with gratitude for her existence. "Marry me," he said as she wiped Hope's fevered brow. "What?" She looked up, startled. "Marry me. Not because it makes sense or because it's convenient or because the twins need stability. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it, because you've taught me that hearts can heal without forgetting, because you've given me a family I never dared to hope for." Alana stared at him for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Really sure, because I come with complications and baggage and 2 children who will always need you to choose them first." "I've been choosing you first for 2 years," Michael said simply. "All of you, and I want to keep choosing you for the rest of my life." They married in June 2009, a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, with 5-year-old True and Hope as ring-bearers, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Judge Morrison, an old friend of Michael's family, performed the ceremony under the oak tree where Catherine had once planned to hang a tire swing. As they exchanged vows, with True tugging on Michael's tuxedo pants and Hope attempting to eat the flower petals, Michael felt Catherine's presence like a blessing rather than a haunting. She would have loved this chaos, this imperfect, perfect moment, this proof that love could bloom even in the soil of loss. The wedding photos showed a family transformed. Alana radiant in simple white, Michael genuinely happy for the first time in years, and two children who had found their forever father in a man who had found his purpose in loving them. That night, as they tucked True and Hope into their beds and whispered stories about families that were made with love rather than just blood, Michael marveled at the journey from grief to joy, from endings to beginnings. He had no way of knowing that their time was measured, that happiness this pure could never last, that the universe was already preparing to test the strength of the love they had built together. But for now, in this moment, they were complete. Chapter 4. When Heaven Demands Another Angel. 2009 to 2012. God has a cruel sense of timing, offering his greatest gifts just long enough for you to believe they're permanent, then revealing that some blessings come with expiration dates written in invisible ink. The summer of 2009 should have been perfect. Michael stood on the deck of their Lake Tahoe rental house, watching Alana teach 5-year-old True and Hope to skip stones across the pristine water. Her laughter carried across the lake like music, mixing with the twins' delighted squeals as she guided their small hands in the ancient art of making stones dance. "Higher arc, baby girl," she called to Hope, who was determined to make her stone skip as many times as True's had. "It's all about the angle." Hope's stone managed 3 skips before disappearing beneath the surface, earning enthusiastic applause from her family. True, not to be outdone, threw his next stone with such force that it sank immediately, causing all 4 of them to dissolve into laughter. This was their 3rd summer vacation together, and Michael marveled at how naturally they had settled into the rhythm of family life. True had inherited Michael's analytical mind, constantly asking why and how, while Hope had her mother's empathy, rescuing wounded birds and insisting on reading stories to her dolls every night. "Daddy, watch this," True called, attempting a running stone throw that ended with him stumbling forward and nearly tumbling into the lake. Michael caught him just in time, swinging him up into his arms as the boy giggled. "Careful there, engineer," Michael said, using his nickname for True's systematic approach to everything. "We need to work on your calculations." "I calculated," True protested. "I just calculated wrong." "That's why we practice," Alana said, wading back toward shore with Hope riding piggyback. "Everything takes practice." That evening, as they sat around the fire pit roasting marshmallows and making s'mores, Michael felt the deep contentment that comes with perfect moments. Hope had fallen asleep against his chest, her sticky fingers tangled in his shirt, while True peppered Alana with questions about how fire worked. "Are you happy?" Alana asked later that night, as they stood on the deck watching stars reflect on the water. "Happier than I have any right to be," Michael admitted, pulling her closer. "You saved me, you know. All of you." "We saved each other," she corrected, leaning into his warmth. "That's what families do." The years that followed seemed to validate her optimism. True and Hope started kindergarten at Seattle Academy, where their different personalities began to shine. True excelled at mathematics and science, building elaborate structures with blocks and explaining to anyone who would listen how bridges stayed up and airplanes flew. Hope gravitated toward art and reading, creating fantastical drawings of families that always included 4 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Alana finished her education degree through night classes, determined to teach despite having a family that no longer required her income. "I want to show True and Hope that dreams don't die just because life gets complicated," she explained to Michael. "They need to see that you can build something beautiful from broken pieces." Michael supported her dreams completely, hiring a part-time nanny so Alana could student teach at a local elementary school. Watching her with other people's children, seeing how naturally she nurtured young minds, filled him with pride and love so intense it sometimes frightened him. But happiness, Michael had learned, was always borrowed time. The first sign came on Hope's 7th birthday, June 15th, 2011. They had planned an elaborate garden party, complete with a bounce house and a magician. Alana had spent weeks preparing, making decorations and planning games with the perfectionist attention she brought to everything involving the twins. The morning started beautifully. True and Hope bounded into their parents' bedroom at sunrise, too excited to sleep, and Michael made his famous birthday pancakes while Alana hung streamers and balloons. By 10 o'clock, 15 of their friends had arrived, and the backyard rang with children's laughter. Alana was serving cake when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as parchment. "Mommy." Hope looked up from her slice with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Alana said, but her voice sounded distant, strained. "Just tired." Michael was at her side instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just dizzy. I need to sit down." She lowered herself carefully into a chair, but Michael could see the tremor in her hands, the way she fought to keep her breathing steady. "I'm taking you to the doctor," he said quietly. "You can't leave Hope's party. Watch me." Dr. Sarah Chen had been their family physician since the twins were babies, and Michael trusted her completely. But when she emerged from the examination room where she'd spent 40 minutes with Alana, her expression made his blood turn to ice. "I need to run some tests," she said carefully. "There are several possibilities, and I don't want to jump to conclusions." "What kind of possibilities?" Michael asked, though some primitive part of his brain already knew. "Her heart rhythm is irregular, and her blood pressure is dangerously elevated. Combined with the dizziness and fatigue she's been experiencing," Dr. Chen paused, "I want to rule out cardiomyopathy." The word hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd researched enough medical conditions during Catherine's illness to know that cardiomyopathy was often a death sentence, especially the genetic variety that struck young, healthy people without warning. "How long do we have?" The question came out of him before he could stop it. "Michael, we don't know anything yet. Let's get the tests done first." But they both knew. In the terrible arithmetic of love and loss, Michael was already calculating borrowed time. The next 6 months became a blur of specialists, treatments, and desperate hope. Alana's condition was indeed genetic cardiomyopathy, a defective gene that had quietly weakened her heart muscle until the organ could no longer pump effectively. The doctors tried medications, dietary changes, and eventually discussed the possibility of a heart transplant. "I want to see them grow up," she told Michael one night in November as they lay in bed listening to True and Hope's muffled giggles from down the hall. "I want to see Hope's first school play and True's science fair projects. I want to teach them to drive and cry at their graduations and walk them down the aisle someday." "You will," Michael said fiercely, though they both knew he was making promises he couldn't keep. "We'll fight this, whatever it takes." He threw himself into research with the same intensity he'd brought to saving Catherine, consulting with specialists from Johns Hopkins to Mayo Clinic, exploring experimental treatments and clinical trials. Money was no object. He liquidated investments, borrowed against the company, spent everything he had and more. But some battles can't be won with wealth or determination or love. By Christmas 2011, Alana needed oxygen to walk up the stairs. By New Year's, she was sleeping propped up on pillows to breathe. The twins, now 7 years old, began to understand that their mother was seriously ill, though they couldn't grasp the magnitude of what was coming. "Is Mommy going to die?" Hope asked one evening in January 2012, with the devastating directness that only children possess. Michael looked at his daughter, because that's what she was, in every way that mattered, and felt his heart break all over again. "Mommy is very sick, baby girl. The doctors are doing everything they can." "But is she going to die?" Hope pressed, and Michael realized he couldn't lie to her. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I promise you this. No matter what happens, you and True will always be safe and loved. Always." True, who had been listening from the doorway, came over and took his sister's hand. "We have Daddy," he said with 7-year-old logic. "Daddy will take care of us." The simple faith in his voice nearly destroyed Michael. Alana died on a Tuesday morning in February 2012, surrounded by the family she had helped create. She slipped away quietly, holding Michael's hand while True and Hope slept in chairs beside her hospital bed. Her last words were a whispered "thank you" that encompassed everything: the love, the laughter, the second chance at happiness she had given him. The funeral was a celebration of a life that had been too brief but immeasurably rich. Teachers from the school where Alana had worked spoke about her dedication to her students. Neighbors shared stories of her kindness and generosity. Friends remembered her laughter and the way she made everyone feel welcome. But for Michael, the most important moment came at the graveside, when 8-year-old True and Hope stood beside him as dirt covered the casket holding their mother. They held his hands with fierce determination, these children who had already learned that love meant staying together when everything else fell apart. "Is she with Catherine now?" Hope asked, her small voice cutting through the February wind. Michael knelt between them, pulling both children close. "Yes, sweetheart. They're together, and they're both watching over us." "Will we be okay?" True asked, and Michael heard the echo of his own question from 4 years ago when their world had first changed. He thought about the promises he'd made to Catherine about finding happiness, the vows he'd made to Alana about loving her children, the commitment he'd made to himself to be the father these 2 amazing kids deserved. "We'll be okay," he said with absolute certainty. "We'll be okay because we have each other, and nothing will ever change that. You 2 are mine, and I am yours, and that's forever." As they walked away from the cemetery together, True on one side and Hope on the other, Michael felt the terrible familiar weight of grief settling on his shoulders. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. This time, he had promises to keep and children to raise and a future to build from the ashes of loss. Some love stories end with death, but others, the most important ones, begin there. The hardest part wasn't behind them, it was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Sacred Promise, 2012 to 2016. Being a single father to twins is like conducting an orchestra where half the musicians can't read music, the other half are tone deaf, and everyone expects a symphony. But love, it turns out, makes even the most chaotic noise sound like harmony. The first morning after Alana's funeral, Michael woke to silence so profound it felt like suffocation. For 4 years, his house had been filled with her soft humming, the twins' chatter, the comfortable chaos of family life. Now, even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick more quietly, as if respecting the weight of grief that had settled over them like fog. 8-year-old True and Hope appeared in his doorway at 7 sharp, still in their matching pajamas, holding hands with the unconscious solidarity of twins who had learned that loss meant sticking together. "Daddy," Hope's voice was small, uncertain. "Are we still going to live here?" The question pierced Michael's heart with surgical precision. Of course they were worried about abandonment. They had lost their birth father, then their mother, and now faced the terrifying possibility that he might disappear too. Michael sat up, opening his arms wide. "Come here, both of you." They climbed onto the bed with the careful movements of children who had learned that adults could break without warning. Michael pulled them close, breathing in the smell of their strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "This is your home. I am your father. You are my children. Nothing, and I mean nothing, will ever change that. Not death, not time, not anything in this world." "But you're not our real daddy," True said with 8-year-old logic that cut like a blade. "What makes a real daddy, True?" The boy considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. "Someone who loves you. Someone who takes care of you when you're sick," Hope added. "Someone who reads bedtime stories and helps with homework," True continued, warming to the topic. "Someone who makes pancakes on Saturdays," Hope finished. "Then I guess I'm as real as they come," Michael said softly, "because I love you more than my own life, and I'll prove it every single day for the rest of yours." The legal adoption process began immediately. Michael hired the best family law attorney in Seattle, determined to ensure that True and Hope would never again face uncertainty about their place in his life. The paperwork was extensive: background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations, but Michael submitted to every requirement with patience, born of absolute determination. Judge Morrison, the same man who had officiated his wedding to Alana, presided over the adoption hearing in March 2012. When the gavel fell and True and Hope officially became Platt children, Michael wept openly in the courtroom. "Congratulations, Mr. Platt," Judge Morrison said warmly. "You now have 2 legally recognized children who share your name and your legacy." That night, Michael took the twins to dinner at their favorite restaurant, a family pizza place where the staff knew their orders by heart, and True always asked for extra cheese, while Hope picked off the pepperoni. As they sat in their usual booth, sharing breadsticks and arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced since Catherine's death: peace. The years that followed tested every aspect of his commitment. Single parenthood was an Olympic sport played without training, where every day brought new challenges and the stakes were impossibly high. When True broke his arm during a Little League game in 2013, Michael spent 6 hours in the emergency room, holding his 9-year-old son while doctors set the bone. He learned to braid Hope's hair for school picture day, creating lopsided masterpieces that made her beam with pride. He survived the great stomach flu epidemic of 2014 that laid waste to their entire household for a week. Through it all, he discovered reserves of patience and creativity he never knew he possessed. When Hope developed a fear of thunderstorms, Michael taught her to count the seconds between lightning and thunder, turning terror into a game of scientific observation. When True struggled with reading, they spent hours each night sounding out words together until suddenly, magically, the letters began making sense. "Mr. Platt," said Mrs. Rodriguez, their 4th-grade teacher, during a parent conference in 2014, "I have to tell you, True and Hope are remarkable children, not just academically, though they're both excellent students, but emotionally. They have a security and confidence that speaks to exceptional parenting." Michael felt pride swell in his chest like a physical thing. These children who had started life homeless and abandoned were thriving, growing into kind, intelligent, secure human beings. But not everyone in the Platt family shared his joy. "This is getting ridiculous, Michael." His brother David stood in Michael's office in November 2014, his face flushed with anger and something darker. "You're 45 years old, and your entire life revolves around 2 kids who aren't even yours." "They are mine," Michael said coldly, not looking up from the homework he was helping True complete, legally, officially, and in every way that matters. "Biologically, they're nothing to you, nothing to our family." True looked up from his math worksheet, his 10-year-old face creased with confusion and hurt. Michael's protective instincts flared like fire. "True, Why don't you go find your sister? I think she's practicing piano in the music room." After True left, Michael stood slowly, every inch of his 6-foot frame radiating controlled fury. "Don't ever speak about my children that way in their presence again." "Your children," David scoffed. "Michael, you picked up a homeless woman and her babies. That doesn't make you their father." "Loving them makes me their father. Choosing them every day makes me their father. Being there for every fever, every nightmare, every triumph, that makes me their father." Michael's voice was deadly quiet. "What makes you their Uncle David?" "Because I'm starting to wonder." David's facade of brotherly concern cracked, revealing the naked resentment beneath. "I'm thinking about the family legacy, about what happens to everything Dad and Grandpa built when you leave it to them. Everything I have will go to my children, my legally adopted children who carry my name and my love. They're not Platts. They're more Platt than you are," Michael shot back, "because they understand what this family should stand for: loyalty, love, taking care of each other. You've forgotten those values somewhere between counting my money and resenting my choices." David left that day in a fury that vibrated through the house like an earthquake aftershock. Patricia called later with hollow apologies, claiming David was just worried about Michael's well-being, but the damage was done. For the first time, Michael saw his brother clearly, not as family, but as a threat to everything he held dear. The twins seemed to sense the shift in family dynamics. Hope began drawing pictures of 3 figures instead of the extended family portraits she'd created before. True asked pointed questions about inheritance and legal rights that seemed far too sophisticated for a 10-year-old. "Daddy," Hope said one evening in early 2015 as Michael tucked her into bed, "Uncle David doesn't like us very much, does he?" Michael's first instinct was to reassure her, to smooth over the conflict with adult lies about family complexity. But he'd promised these children honesty, and their perceptive questions deserved truthful answers. "Uncle David is confused," he said carefully. "He thinks love is about blood and money. He doesn't understand that real family is about choice." "You chose us," True said from his matching bed across the room. "Every single day," Michael confirmed, "and I'll keep choosing you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." As 2015 melted into 2016, and True and Hope grew from 10 to 11 to 12 years old, their bond with Michael deepened into something unshakable. They were old enough now to remember life before him, to understand how completely he had transformed their world. Their gratitude manifested in fierce loyalty and love that humbled him daily. When True scored the winning goal in his soccer championship, the first person he looked for in the stands was Michael. When Hope won the 6th grade science fair with a project about heart disease inspired by her mother's death, she dedicated her victory to "my daddy, who taught me that knowledge can fight the things we're afraid of." The Christmas of 2015 brought an unexpected gift: David and Patricia's first overture in months, an invitation to their holiday party. Michael almost declined, but True and Hope begged to see their cousins, so he agreed. The party was a showcase of David's success: expensive decorations, catered food, and guests who spoke in the careful code of Seattle's social elite. Patricia introduced the twins as Michael's wards, a term that made Michael's jaw clench with suppressed anger. The breaking point came when 12-year-old Hope, in her sweet, innocent way, mentioned that she was excited about inheriting Grandpa Platt's antique desk someday, just like Daddy had promised. The room fell silent. David's face turned purple. Patricia spilled wine on her designer dress. "Inheriting." David's voice was dangerously quiet. Michael stepped forward, placing protective hands on True and Hope's shoulders. "My children are my heirs, David. That shouldn't surprise anyone." "Your children," David repeated, his voice dripping venom. How convenient. The drive home was quiet, but Michael could feel True and Hope processing what they had witnessed. These children who had grown up with unconditional love were beginning to understand that not all family members shared their father's values. "Daddy?" True asked, as they pulled into their driveway. "Are we really going to inherit your stuff?" Michael turned to face both twins, seeing Alana's wisdom in Hope's eyes and Catherine's curiosity in True's expression. "You're going to inherit something much more important than money or property. You're going to inherit the responsibility to love each other, to take care of each other, and to remember that real wealth isn't what you have, it's who you have." "But Uncle David seemed really mad about the money part," Hope observed with troubling insight. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with December air. Sometimes adults make the mistake of thinking money is more important than people. Uncle David is making that mistake. As they walked into their house, their real home, filled with 12 years of memories and love, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had marked the beginning of something dangerous. David's mask had slipped, revealing the greed and resentment that had been growing like cancer in the family's heart. And cancer, Michael knew better than most, was a patient enemy that attacked when you felt safest. But as True and Hope raced upstairs to get ready for bed, their laughter echoing through the halls like a promise of tomorrow, Michael made another vow to the women he had loved and lost. He would protect these children with every breath in his body, every dollar in his accounts, every ounce of strength he possessed. They had saved him from a living death, and he would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of their love, even if it meant going to war with his own blood. Chapter 6. Dreams Taking Flight, 2016 to 2020. Teenagers are earthquakes, disguised as human beings, beautiful, terrifying forces of nature that can level everything you thought. You knew about love, patience, and the structural integrity of your sanity. Michael Platt stood in the wings of Roosevelt High School's auditorium, watching his 15-year-old daughter Hope command the stage like she was born for spotlights. Her voice soared through the opening number of Our Town, clear and powerful, reaching every corner of the packed theater. In the front row, True sat with his smartphone, illegally recording his sister's performance with the fierce loyalty of a twin who understood that some moments demanded documentation. 7 years had passed since Alana's death, and the children she had left behind were blooming into extraordinary young adults. Hope, now 15, had inherited her mother's compassion and grace, channeling both into a love of theater and a fierce determination to become a doctor. True, equally 15 but 4 minutes older, had developed into a mathematical prodigy with his father's analytical mind and an engineer's approach to solving the world's problems. "She's incredible," whispered Janet Morgan, the drama teacher who had discovered Hope's talent during freshman year. "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never seen a student with such natural stage presence." Michael nodded, too emotional to trust his voice. This was Hope's starring debut, the culmination of months of rehearsals and preparation. She had practiced her lines at the dinner table, in the car, while brushing her teeth, until Michael and True could recite the entire play from memory. As the final curtain fell and the audience erupted in applause, Hope's eyes found Michael's in the wings. Her face lit up with pure joy, and she mouthed, "I love you, Daddy," before taking her bow. In that moment, Michael felt Alana's presence so strongly he almost turned to share the triumph with her. The cast party afterward was a chaos of teenagers, proud parents, and enough sugar to power a small city. Michael found himself in the familiar role of the dad who knew everyone's names, remembered their siblings' activities, and had somehow become the trusted adult that other people's children confided in. "Mr. Platt," said Kelly Martinez, Hope's best friend since middle school, her tone carrying subtle poison. "My mom wants to know if you can chaperone the spring dance. She says you're the only parent who actually makes it fun instead of just standing around looking stern." "I'll consider it," Michael said, privately amused by his reputation as the cool dad. It was a title he'd never expected to earn, but watching Hope navigate the complex social dynamics of high school had taught him that teenagers needed adults who remembered what it felt like to be young and uncertain. True approached with a plate loaded with cake and the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully documented his sister's triumph. "Got the whole performance," he announced, showing his phone screen. "Already uploaded it to our cloud storage and sent copies to all Hope's friends." At 15, True had already mastered technology that baffled most adults. He built computers from spare parts, programmed apps for fun, and had been accepted into an advanced mathematics program at the University of Washington for gifted high school students. His teachers spoke of him in reverent tones, predicting a future as brilliant as his adoptive father's. But it was the twins' emotional intelligence that truly amazed Michael. They had processed their early losses with remarkable resilience, emerging not bitter or broken, but compassionate and strong. They volunteered at the animal shelter where they had first learned that being abandoned didn't mean being unworthy of love. They visited the food bank where Alana had once stood in line with them as babies, now helping to serve families in crisis. "We want to give back," Hope had explained when she suggested the volunteer work, "because we know how it feels to need help." The summer of 2017 brought new adventures as the twins turned 13. Michael rented a house in Tuscany, fulfilling Alana's dream of showing her children the art and culture of Italy. They spent 3 weeks exploring museums, eating gelato for breakfast, and creating memories that would last lifetimes. "This is where Mommy always wanted to bring us," Hope said as they stood in the Sistine Chapel, her voice reverent with wonder. "She's here with us," True added with typical directness. "Just because we can't see her doesn't mean she's not here." Michael marveled at their ability to carry their mother's memory without being crushed by it, to honor her dreams while building their own. High school brought new complexities. Hope joined the debate team and the medical club, her sights set firmly on pre-med studies. True took advanced placement courses in mathematics and physics, already working on college applications even as a sophomore. Their academic success earned them scholarships and awards that Michael displayed with shameless parental pride. But success also brought attention, and attention brought questions that grew increasingly pointed and personal. "So you're not their real father?" asked Brad Williams, a parent at one of True's academic competitions, with the casual cruelty that some people mistake for conversation. "I'm their father in every way that matters," Michael replied evenly, though his hands clenched into fists. "But they're not actually related to you, and you're leaving them everything?" "They're my children. I adopted them legally when they were 8. That's unusual, taking on someone else's kids like that, especially given what happened to their mother." Brad's voice carried an insinuation that made Michael's blood run cold. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing specific, just that some people might wonder about the timing. Wife dies, you get the kids and the life insurance. Very convenient." Michael stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you have something to say about my family, say it plainly. Otherwise, keep your poisonous speculation to yourself." The exchange ended there, but Michael noticed how Brad's attitude toward True shifted, subtle but unmistakable discrimination that made his blood boil. More troubling was the realization that other people might be having similar thoughts, planting seeds of suspicion about his motives and Alana's death. It was during True's junior year, when both twins were 16, that the whispers began in earnest. At charity galas, business meetings and social gatherings, Michael started noticing the careful questions, the sideways glances, the conversations that stopped when he approached. Patricia had been busy spreading her own version of events at every opportunity. 2 wives, both dead, both leaving him everything, she confided to her book club members with manufactured concern. And now he's so attached to those children, almost obsessively protective. It makes you wonder. Wonder about what? Asked her friend Margaret Townsend. Whether grief can make people capable of things they'd never normally consider, whether someone might help along a medical condition if it meant getting what they wanted. The poison was spreading through Seattle's social circles like cancer, invisible but deadly. By 2018, when True and Hope were 14 and preparing for high school, Michael began to understand that he was fighting more than just inheritance disputes. He was fighting for his reputation, his freedom, and ultimately his life. The family updated their wills that year, ensuring that True and Hope were protected regardless of what happened to him. But even as he took precautions, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that David's resentment was growing into something more dangerous than simple greed. The 2019 college acceptances brought triumph and terror in equal measure. Hope was accepted to Stanford with a full merit scholarship, while True received offers from MIT, Caltech, and Carnegie Mellon. Their achievements were covered in the local paper, Local Twins Overcome Homelessness to Achieve Academic Excellence, complete with photos of their proud father beaming beside them. But the attention also brought unwanted scrutiny. Online comment sections filled with speculation about the family's unusual dynamics. Anonymous posts questioned whether Michael's wealth had bought his children's achievements, whether their success was natural or artificially enhanced through unlimited resources. "Convenient how those kids turned out so perfect," read one particularly cruel comment. "Almost like they were trained to be the ideal heirs. Makes you wonder what really happened to their mother." The Whisper campaign intensified throughout 2020 and 2021 as True and Hope excelled in their freshman years at their respective colleges. David's patience was running out as the twins' continued success made them more sympathetic and their inheritance claims stronger. Patricia's book club had become a breeding ground for increasingly dark speculation. "I heard Michael took out a substantial life insurance policy on Alana just months before she died," Margaret Townsend confided with manufactured shock. "And he was so controlling about her medications, never let the nurses handle them." "That does seem suspicious," Patricia agreed, though she knew the truth, that Michael had been desperate to save Alana's life, not end it, combined with his obsessive behavior after Catherine died. "Two dead wives and a fortune left to children who aren't his blood," Margaret concluded with false sadness. "If I were the authorities, I'd want to take a closer look at those deaths." By Christmas 2021, when 17-year-old True and Hope were clearly on paths to extraordinary success, David realized that civil inheritance challenges weren't enough. The twins were too sympathetic, Michael's parenting too obviously devoted, their family bond too genuine for any jury to break. But murder accusations, that was different. That would destroy not just Michael's inheritance plans, but his freedom, his reputation, and his relationship with True and Hope forever. "This has to stop," he told Patricia in the privacy of their bedroom after Michael's annual holiday party, watching the twins help their father clean up with the easy intimacy of a family that genuinely loved each other. "They're going to inherit everything, and there won't be anything left for us or our kids. The inheritance case isn't working. The jury likes them too much." "Then we change the game," David said with cold calculation. "We make this about more than money. We make it about justice for Alana." "What do you mean?" "I mean we ask some hard questions about how convenient her death was for Michael. Young, healthy woman dies suddenly, leaving him everything and full custody of two children who worship him. Some might call that suspicious timing." Patricia stared at her husband with growing horror and admiration. "You want to accuse him of murder?" "I want to suggest that perhaps the authorities should take another look at Alana's death. With modern forensic techniques, who knows what they might find." The seed was planted, and David began cultivating it with the same methodical patience he'd brought to destroying Michael's reputation. Anonymous tips to police about suspicious circumstances surrounding Alana's death, carefully placed questions about Michael's access to medications and his behavior during her final illness, whispered suggestions that perhaps the original autopsy had missed something important. Someone should examine those tissue samples again, Patricia mentioned to Judge Morrison's wife at a charity luncheon in January 2022. With all the advances in toxicology, they might find evidence that wasn't detectable 12 years ago. The machinery of destruction was already turning, gears greased with lies and desperation, designed to crush everything Michael held dear. David's inheritance case was just the opening move in a much larger game, one where the stakes were life and death, and the prize was the complete annihilation of the family that had dared to exist without his permission. As winter turned to spring 2022, and the twins celebrated their 18th birthdays with typical teenage enthusiasm, Michael felt the weight of brewing conflict like a storm gathering on the horizon. David's civil case was proceeding, but something in his brother's eyes suggested that legal maneuvering was only the beginning. That night, as he tucked college brochures into True and Hope's graduation gifts, Michael made a silent promise to the photographs of Catherine and Alana that watched from his desk. He would protect these children with everything he had against every enemy they faced for as long as breath remained in his body. He had no idea that his own brother was already planning to ensure that wouldn't be very long at all. The civil case was just the appetizer. The main course would be accusations that could send him to prison for the rest of his life, destroying everything he'd built and leaving True and Hope to face the world, believing their father was a monster. But David had made one critical miscalculation. He had underestimated the children he was trying to destroy, forgetting that lions raised by lions grow up knowing how to fight. Chapter 7. The Web of Betrayal Tightens. 2020 to 2022. Evil doesn't always announce itself with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it whispers poison in drawing rooms and plants lies in legal documents, growing stronger with each small victory until it's powerful enough to devour everything good in its path. The King County Family Court, filing on March 18, 2023, looked routine to casual observers. Another wealthy family squabbling over inheritance rights. But David Platt knew it was only the opening move in a chess game where the final objective was his brother's complete destruction. Mental incompetence due to prolonged grief disorder, read the legal petition that David's attorney, James Blackstone, had crafted with surgical precision. Undue influence by minor beneficiaries who exploited the defendant's compromised psychological state for financial gain. The language was careful, clinical, designed to sound like legitimate concern rather than naked greed. But in the margins of his personal copy, David had written notes in red ink that revealed his true intentions. Phase 1. Establish pattern of poor judgment. Phase 2. Question circumstances of A's death. Phase 3. Criminal referral if necessary. Patricia sat across from him in their home office, reviewing the thick folder of evidence they had spent 2 years compiling. Photographs of Michael at Alana's grave, looking grief-stricken and lost. Financial records showing millions spent on the twins' education and care. Psychological profiles from hired experts who had never actually examined Michael but were willing to speculate about his mental state for the right price. This should be enough for the civil case, she said, though her voice carried doubt. The twins are 18 now, legal adults with full inheritance rights. The civil case is just the beginning, David replied with satisfaction. Once we establish that Michael's judgment has been compromised since Catherine died, we can start asking harder questions about his wives' convenient deaths. You're really going through with the murder angle? I'm going to suggest that perhaps the authorities should take another look at some very suspicious timing. Young wife dies of heart disease right after updating her will. Grieving widower immediately becomes obsessed with her children. Some might call that a pattern worth investigating. The first depositions began in May 2023, just as True and Hope were finishing their freshman years at MIT and Stanford. The twins flew home for summer break to find their father transformed by legal stress, aging visibly under the weight of defending his mental competency and parenting decisions. "Miss Platt," Blackstone asked Hope during her deposition, his voice carrying false sympathy, "how would you describe your father's emotional state during your mother's final illness?" "He was devastated," Hope answered honestly. "He loved her completely." "Would you say he was obsessive about her care, controlling about her medical treatment?" Hope's attorney objected, but the question hung in the air like poison gas. "My father wanted to make sure Mom had the best possible care. That's not obsessive, that's love." "Did he ever research her medications? Spend time online looking up treatments?" "Of course, he researched everything that might help her, including digitalis, heart medications, cardiac drug interactions." The specificity of the questions made Hope's blood run cold. Why was David's attorney asking about digitalis unless he was planning something more sinister than inheritance disputes? True's deposition was equally unsettling. Blackstone pressed him about Michael's access to Alana's medications, his control over her daily care routine, his behavior during her final weeks. "Your father handled all of your mother's medications personally, correct?" "He wanted to make sure she got them on time," True replied, but he could sense the trap being laid. "Never let the nurses administer them? Never allowed you or your sister to help?" "We were 8 years old. 8-year-olds don't handle prescription drugs." "But now you're 18, old enough to understand that such controlling behavior might have alternative explanations." The implication was clear, even if the accusation remained unspoken. David wasn't just challenging the inheritance, he was laying groundwork for something far more devastating. That evening, as the twins sat with Michael in his study, they could feel the weight of unspoken accusations settling over their family like storm clouds. "They're not just trying to take our inheritance," True said with mathematical certainty. "They're building towards something bigger." "The questions about Mom's medications," Hope added, her pre-med training helping her recognize the pattern. "They're trying to suggest that Dad somehow caused her death." Michael's face went pale as the implications hit him. "They wouldn't. Not even David would." "Uncle David just spent 2 hours asking me about your access to Mom's pills and whether you researched heart medications online," Hope interrupted. "What do you think he's planning?" The answer came sooner than they expected. Dr. Marcus Webb, the medical examiner who had performed Alana's autopsy in 2012, received an unexpected visit from David's private investigator in July 2022. Webb was recently retired, drowning in gambling debts and vulnerable to financial persuasion disguised as legitimate medical inquiry. "Mr. Platt's family has raised some questions about the original examination," the investigator explained with practiced sympathy. "They're wondering whether modern testing techniques might reveal evidence that wasn't detectable 12 years ago." "The autopsy was thorough," Webb protested weakly. "Death was clearly due to cardiac failure consistent with genetic cardiomyopathy. But tissue samples are still stored, correct? And new toxicology methods can detect substances that older tests missed." Webb understood the subtext perfectly. For $50,000 in consulting fees, he could discover evidence that would rewrite history and destroy a man's life. By September 2023, David had recruited a network of corrupted professionals willing to sell their integrity for financial relief. Margaret Townsend agreed to remember suspicious details about Michael's behavior during Alana's illness. Dr. Richard Pemberton would provide psychiatric testimony about the connection between grief-induced mental illness and violent behavior. Computer forensic expert Kevin Harrison would find deleted browsing history on Michael's laptop showing research into cardiac poisons. The civil inheritance case proceeded through fall 2023, but David's real focus was on the criminal conspiracy he was orchestrating behind closed doors. Every legal filing, every deposition, every piece of testimony was designed not just to challenge Michael's competency, but to establish the foundation for murder accusations. "Your Honor," Blackstone argued during a civil hearing in November 2023, "we submit that the defendant's pattern of behavior surrounding his wives' deaths warrants further investigation by appropriate authorities. Two healthy young women, both dead within 8 years, both leaving substantial assets to a man whose mental state has been questioned by multiple medical professionals." Jennifer Walsh, Michael's attorney, objected strenuously, but the seed was planted in official court records. David's civil case was creating a paper trail that would support criminal accusations when the time was right. Christmas 2023 brought an ominous peace, like the eye of a hurricane where destruction pauses to gather strength. True and Hope spent their college break at home, sensing the growing tension but unable to fully comprehend the scope of their uncle's planned betrayal. "Something's wrong," Hope told True as they wrapped presents on Christmas Eve. "Dad's been getting weird phone calls and he looks scared all the time." "Uncle David's been asking strange questions about Mom's death," True replied. "Not just inheritance stuff, medical stuff, like he's looking for something specific." They found their answer on New Year's Day 2024, when David made his final move with the ruthless precision of a chess grandmaster, delivering checkmate. The Seattle police arrived at Michael's house with a warrant for his arrest on charges of first-degree murder in the death of Alana Weston Platt. As they read him his rights, Michael looked across his living room at True and Hope, seeing his own shock and horror reflected in their faces. "New evidence has come to light suggesting that Mrs. Platt was murdered by digitalis poisoning," Detective Ray Wilson explained as he fastened handcuffs around Michael's wrists. "The medical examiner has revised his findings based on advanced testing of preserved tissue samples." "This is impossible," Michael said, his voice breaking with disbelief. "Alana died of heart disease, genetic cardiomyopathy. We have documentation. You'll have time to discuss your defense with your attorney," Detective Wilson replied. "Right now, you're under arrest for murder in the first degree." As they led Michael away in handcuffs, with news cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation, True and Hope stood frozen in their doorway. In less than 24 hours, their father had gone from respected businessman to accused murderer, their family from loving to infamous, their future from bright to destroyed. "Did you know?" Hope whispered to True as their father's police car disappeared down their driveway. "About the accusations, about what Uncle David was planning." "I knew he hated us," True replied, his mathematical mind already working to process this new equation. "I just didn't know he hated us enough to frame Dad for murder." That night, as they sat in their empty house, surrounded by police tape and shattered dreams, True and Hope made a pact that would define the rest of their lives. They would not let their father rot in prison for a crime he didn't commit. They would not let David's greed destroy the man who had saved them from homelessness and raised them with unconditional love. They would prove Michael's innocence if it took every skill they possessed, every connection they'd made, every ounce of intelligence they'd inherited from the parents who had shaped them. The civil inheritance case had been David's opening move. The murder charges were his attempt at checkmate. But True and Hope Platt were about to prove that in the game of family loyalty, they had learned from the absolute master, and they played to win. Chapter 8. The Battlefield Expands. 2023 to 2024. Desperation transforms ordinary men into monsters, and monsters will devour anything, including family, to feed their hunger for what was never theirs to claim. The inheritance case was crumbling like a house built on sand, and David Platt knew it. By October 2023, his carefully constructed narrative of Michael's mental incompetence was falling apart under the weight of evidence presented by True and Hope's legal team. Medical records proved Michael's excellent mental health, character witnesses testified to his devoted parenting, and financial experts confirmed his sound business judgment throughout the twins' upbringing. James Blackstone, David's attorney, delivered the devastating news during their private meeting at the Fairmont Hotel, where David had insisted they gather to avoid being overheard at his office. "The jury isn't buying it," Blackstone said bluntly, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Your brother's psychiatric evaluations are clean, the twins' testimony is compelling, and frankly, your witnesses look like they're reading from a script." David's face flushed crimson with rage and desperation. 8 months of legal maneuvering, hundreds of thousands in attorney fees, and careful character assassination, all for nothing. The inheritance that should have been his was slipping away to 2 children who weren't even real Platts. "There has to be something else," David snarled. "Some other angle we haven't explored." "Like what?" "Your brother adopted them legally, raised them lovingly, and has clear mental capacity. Unless you can prove he killed someone." Blackstone stopped mid-sentence as David's eyes lit up with sudden, terrible inspiration. "What if he did?" David said slowly, his voice carrying the dangerous quiet of a man who had found his weapon. "What if Michael didn't just benefit from his wives' deaths? What if he caused them?" Blackstone stared at his client with growing horror. "David, think about it. 2 wives, both dead, both leaving him everything. Catherine dies of cancer, but what if it wasn't natural? Alana dies of a rare heart condition, but what if it was poison?" David's voice gained momentum as the conspiracy took shape in his mind. Michael researches medical conditions obsessively. He had access to experimental treatments, untested drugs. He could have made it look natural. "You're talking about murder accusations without evidence." "Evidence can be found," David interrupted with cold calculation. "Evidence can be created. Medical examiners can be convinced to take another look at tissue samples. Witnesses can remember suspicious behavior they previously overlooked. The plan that emerged from that hotel room was diabolical in its simplicity. If civil law couldn't remove True and Hope from Michael's will, criminal law would remove Michael from society entirely. Life in prison for double murder would solve David's inheritance problem permanently. Dr. Marcus Webb, the medical examiner who had signed Alana's death certificate 11 years earlier, was recently retired and drowning in gambling debts that made him vulnerable to financial persuasion. For $50,000, he agreed to re-examine tissue samples and discover traces of digitalis, a heart medication that could be lethal in high doses. The original examination was rushed, Dr. Webb would testify. Modern testing reveals evidence consistent with digitalis poisoning, which would explain the cardiac symptoms Mrs. Platt experienced before her death. Patricia recruited her book club friend, Margaret Townsend, to provide witness testimony about Michael's suspicious behavior during Alana's illness. For $20,000, Margaret would remember seeing Michael researching heart medications online and acting strangely secretive about Alana's treatment regimen. The criminal complaint was filed on New Year's Day 2024, exactly as David had planned in Chapter 7. Michael was arrested at his office while True and Hope were home for winter break, completely aware that this escalation was coming, but powerless to prevent it. The headlines were explosive. Tech billionaire charged with wife's murder and deadly love. Did grief-stricken widower kill again? The story dominated Seattle news cycles as reporters dug into every aspect of the case with rabid intensity. Michael's mugshot, the face of a man who had aged a decade in a single day, was plastered across newspaper front pages and television screens. The narrative was irresistible. A wealthy man who had murdered 2 wives for insurance money and inheritance rights, then manipulated innocent children to cover his tracks. "The defendant exhibits a clear pattern of behavior," announced District Attorney Robert Hayes during his press conference. Two wives, both dead under medically suspicious circumstances, both leaving him substantial assets. Add to that his documented mental instability following the first death, and we have a compelling case for premeditated murder. The twins, now 19 years old and home from their freshman college years, found their world transformed into a nightmare beyond imagination. Their father sat in King County Jail, denied bail as a flight risk, while their home was searched by forensic teams looking for evidence of murder weapons and poison supplies. "This is insane," True said, as he and Hope stood in their father's empty study, watching police bag computer files and financial records. "Dad couldn't hurt a fly, let alone murder Mom Alana." Hope's face was pale but determined, her pre-med training already analyzing the accusations with clinical precision. "Digitalis poisoning? That's ridiculous. Mom had genetic cardiomyopathy. We have her complete medical history, genetic testing, family history. There's no way it was poison." "Uncle David is behind this," True said with mathematical certainty. "The timing is too convenient. He's losing the inheritance case, so he escalates to criminal charges." The evidence against Michael seemed overwhelming to outside observers. Dr. Webb's revised autopsy findings showed digitalis levels consistent with poisoning. Margaret Townsend testified that she had seen Michael researching heart medications and acting secretively during Alana's final months. Computer forensic experts claimed to have found deleted browsing history on Michael's laptop, showing searches for digitalis toxicity and undetectable poisons. But the twins knew their father better than any jury ever could. 19 years of unconditional love had taught them to recognize truth from lies, devotion from manipulation. They also possessed something David had underestimated: brilliant minds, trained to solve complex problems, and the fierce loyalty that came from a lifetime of being chosen and cherished. "We're not just going to sit here while they destroy Dad," Hope announced during one of their jail visits in February 2024, speaking through reinforced glass to the man who had saved their lives 2 decades earlier. "We're going to prove your innocence." "How?" Michael asked, his voice hollow with despair. "The evidence is manufactured," True interrupted with engineering confidence. "And manufactured evidence leaves fingerprints. We just have to know where to look." The investigation they launched made their previous legal research look like amateur hour. True used his MIT connections to access forensic databases and toxicology research that most people couldn't even pronounce. Hope consulted with cardiologists and genetic specialists who confirmed that Alana's heart condition was absolutely genuine and hereditary. But their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. True's data compression algorithm, the same mathematical brilliance that had earned him recognition from major tech companies, could also detect anomalies in digital evidence. "Dad's computer files have been altered," True announced to Hope in late February 2024, his laptop screen filled with code that looked like hieroglyphs to most people. "Someone planted those search histories and backdated them to 2011. The metadata doesn't match." "Can you prove it?" "I can prove who did it," True said with grim satisfaction. "The digital fingerprints lead right back to a computer registered to David's law firm. Uncle David didn't just fabricate evidence, he was stupid enough to do it from a traceable source." Hope's medical investigation was equally damning. "I got Mom's original tissue samples from the hospital," she told True during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "The ones Dr. Webb claims showed digitalis. They've been contaminated with plant matter that wasn't there 11 years ago. Someone added digitalis to old samples and hoped nobody would notice." "Can you prove when the contamination occurred?" "Better than that. I can prove who had access to the samples. There are only 3 people with keys to that storage facility: the current medical examiner, the lab technician, and Dr. Webb himself." The pieces of David's conspiracy began falling into place with mathematical precision. bribed witnesses, planted evidence, corrupted officials, all leading back to a desperate man who had chosen to destroy his brother rather than accept that love could create stronger family bonds than blood. But proving conspiracy and overturning criminal charges required more than just evidence. It required a courtroom performance that would expose David's lies while vindicating 20 years of genuine love and devotion. As winter 2024 deepened toward the trial date, with Michael still imprisoned and facing life without parole, True and Hope prepared for the fight of their lives. They were no longer the scared children who had once hidden behind their father's protection. They were young adults who had inherited his strength, their mother's wisdom, and a fierce determination to protect the man who had chosen them when the world had given up. "We're going to save him," Hope said one evening as they stood outside the jail where Michael awaited trial for a crime he never committed. "We're going to destroy Uncle David," True added with cold precision. "We're going to prove that family means fighting for each other, no matter what the cost." The stage was set for a battle that would determine whether justice existed in a world where money could buy lies, where desperation could corrupt truth, and where 20 years of love could be erased by one man's greed. Michael Platt sat in his jail cell, facing life in prison for loving too deeply and choosing family over blood. But he had raised his children well, teaching them that love was worth fighting for, and that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always found a way to surface. True and Hope were about to prove that some lessons, once learned, could move mountains and topple giants. The final battle for their family's soul was about to begin. Chapter 9. When Everything Crumbles. 2023 to 2024. There comes a moment when the devil stops whispering and starts screaming, when evil abandons subtlety for savage directness, when you realize that some people will burn down the world rather than watch you inherit what they believe belongs to them. The King County Jail visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, a sterile space where families said goodbye through reinforced glass and metal phones that carried voices but not touch. Michael Platt, once worth $75 million and master of his own empire, now wore orange scrubs and the hollow expression of a man who had watched his entire world collapse in a single day. 20-year-old True and Hope sat across from him, their faces masks of controlled fury that barely concealed the volcanic emotions beneath. 1 week had passed since their father's arrest for first-degree murder in the death of their mother Alana, and the twins had aged years in those 7 days. "The prosecutor is calling it a pattern," Hope said quietly, her pre-med training helping her process the medical evidence with clinical detachment. "2 wives, both dead, both leaving you everything. They're saying you poisoned Mom with digitalis to cause heart failure." Michael's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Digitalis, your mother had genetic cardiomyopathy confirmed by 3 different specialists. Her entire family has a history of heart disease." "We know that," True said with engineering precision. "The question is how to prove Uncle David manufactured this evidence without sounding like conspiracy theorists." The criminal case had exploded across national media like a bomb detonating in slow motion. Billionaire's murder trial dominated headlines while television legal experts debated the prosecution's evidence with gleeful intensity. Michael's mugshot appeared beside photos of Catherine and Alana, creating a visual narrative of predatory wealth and serial killing that captured public imagination. Dr. Marcus Webb's revised autopsy findings were the prosecution's smoking gun. Tissue samples that had been stored for 11 years allegedly showed traces of digitalis, a heart medication that could be lethal in high doses. Webb testified that modern testing techniques had revealed evidence that was impossible to detect in 2012. The digitalis levels found in Mrs. Platt's system would have been sufficient to trigger fatal cardiac arrhythmia, Webb stated during the preliminary hearing. Combined with her existing heart condition, even small doses could have caused the symptoms and death pattern observed. Margaret Townsend, Patricia's book club conspirator, provided the human element to the prosecution's case. She testified tearfully about visiting the Platt house during Alana's illness and observing Michael's suspicious behavior around his wife's medication. "He was very controlling about her pills," Margaret claimed. "Wouldn't let anyone else handle them, not even the nurse, and I saw him researching heart medications on his computer, looking up dosages and side effects. When I asked about it, he got very defensive." The computer evidence seemed damning. Forensic analysts claimed Michael's laptop showed deleted browsing history from 2011 to 2012, including searches for digitalis poisoning symptoms, undetectable cardiac drugs, and how long until heart medication causes death. The prosecution painted a picture of premeditated murder disguised as compassionate caregiving. "Ladies and gentlemen," District Attorney Hayes told the grand jury, "this defendant researched exactly how to kill his wife, administered the poison over weeks or months while pretending to care for her, then played the grieving widower to perfection. He used those children as props in his performance, gaining sympathy while covering up his crime." The twins' college lives disintegrated under media scrutiny. Stanford temporarily suspended hope pending investigation of family circumstances, while MIT classmates whispered behind True's back about sleeping in the same house as an alleged murderer. Their academic achievements were reframed as evidence of calculated manipulation, brilliant children smart enough to help cover up their stepfather's crimes. "Murder twins, what did they know?" screamed one particularly vicious tabloid headline above photos of True and Hope leaving the courthouse. The article speculated that they might have been accomplices, too young to prosecute but old enough to understand their father's actions. Michael's mental health deteriorated rapidly under the crushing weight of accusations. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and built technological empires now spent his days in a 6x8 cell, staring at concrete walls, while his reputation was destroyed one news cycle at a time. "Maybe I should just confess," he told True and Hope during a visit in November 2023. "End this nightmare for you two. Let you rebuild your lives without my name destroying your futures." "You want to confess to a crime you didn't commit?" Hope's voice carried the steel that Alana had passed down through love rather than genetics. "You want to abandon us the way everyone else has?" "I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting you. By lying. By letting Uncle David win. By telling the world that our mother married a murderer." True's mathematical mind cut through emotions to reach core logic. That would destroy her memory more than any false accusation ever could. The prosecution's case seemed airtight as winter 2023 melted into 2024. 3 expert witnesses, computer evidence, medical testimony, and a motive involving millions of dollars in inheritance. Michael's defense attorney, Jennifer Walsh, had been reduced to arguing reasonable doubt in a case where doubt seemed unreasonable. "The evidence is circumstantial," she argued during pre-trial motions. "No one witnessed any crime. The medical findings are based on 12-year-old tissue samples that could have been contaminated. The computer evidence shows deleted files, not criminal intent. But circumstantial evidence had sent innocent men to prison before, and the prosecution's narrative was seductive in its simplicity. Wealthy man kills inconvenient wives, uses orphan children as sympathy shields, nearly gets away with perfect crimes until justice finally catches up." The trial was scheduled to begin February 14, 2024, another Valentine's Day that would be remembered for heartbreak rather than love. Jury selection revealed the challenge Michael faced. Potential jurors who had already formed opinions based on media coverage, who saw him as either a calculating killer or a grieving father, with little middle ground between the extremes. "Your Honor," Jennifer argued during jury selection, Pre-trial publicity has made it impossible to find unbiased jurors. The defendant's right to fair trial has been compromised by sensationalistic media coverage. The people have a right to justice, countered District Attorney Hayes. Mr. Platt's wealth and social connections cannot shield him from accountability for his alleged crimes. As opening statements approached, Michael sat in his jail cell, writing what he believed might be his final letter to True and Hope, the children who had given his life meaning and might now watch him spend the rest of it behind bars. "My beloved son and daughter," he wrote, "whatever happens in the coming weeks, I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You saved me from grief and gave me purpose. You turned my house into a home and my existence into joy. If the price for loving you is spending my life in prison, then I pay it gladly, because you were worth every moment of happiness, every sacrifice, every choice I made to be your father." But True and Hope had no intention of reading their father's goodbye letter. While Michael prepared for legal execution, his children were preparing for war with weapons David had never expected them to possess. Brilliant minds trained by the man he was trying to destroy, absolute certainty in their father's innocence, and 20 years of love that made them willing to fight the entire world. The preliminary hearing on March 10th, 2024, revealed the prosecution's strategy in all its devastating detail. Webb's medical testimony, Margaret's witness account, and computer forensic evidence painted Michael as a cold-blooded killer who had used his wife's existing heart condition to cover up premeditated murder. The defendant researched digitalis extensively before his wife's death, the prosecutor announced. He had motive, insurance money, and complete control over the minor children. He had means, access to prescription medications through his wealth and connections. And he had opportunity, exclusive access to his wife's daily medication regimen. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, facing life in prison without possibility of parole, True and Hope sat in the courtroom gallery with expressions that would have made their mothers proud. They weren't crying or pleading or accepting defeat. They were calculating. 20 years of unconditional love had taught them that family meant fighting for each other when the stakes were highest, that truth was worth defending even against impossible odds, that some battles could only be won by those with nothing left to lose. David Platt had made the mistake of underestimating the children he had tried to destroy. He was about to learn that lions might sleep peacefully, but they awakened as apex predators when their pride was threatened. The trial of the century was about to begin, with everything True and Hope had ever loved hanging in the balance. Their father faced life in prison for a crime he didn't commit, while the real criminal sat in the gallery wearing the mask of concerned family. But masks, the twins had learned, could be removed. Lies could be exposed. And justice, no matter how deeply buried under corruption and greed, could always be resurrected by those brave enough to dig for it. The final battle was about to commence, and True and Hope Platt were ready for war. Chapter 10. The Children Who Became Warriors. 2024. Justice isn't always delivered by judges and juries. Sometimes it comes through the hands of children who refuse to let evil triumph over the man who taught them that love conquers everything, even when everything seems lost. The Seattle courthouse had never witnessed anything like what walked through its doors on March 15, 2024. 20-year-old True and Hope Platt entered not as grieving children watching their father's murder trial, but as investigators carrying briefcases full of evidence that would either save an innocent man or expose the most elaborate frame job in Washington state history. Michael sat at the defendant's table in handcuffs, facing life in prison for allegedly poisoning the woman he had loved more than his own life. Behind him, David and Patricia wore expressions of barely concealed satisfaction as they watched their plan approach its devastating conclusion. District Attorney Hayes began his opening statement with prosecutorial confidence, born from what appeared to be an airtight case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this trial is about a man who killed twice for money and used orphan children as shields to hide his crimes. The defendant researched poison, administered it to his wife over months, and watched her die while playing the devoted husband. But when Jennifer Walsh, Michael's attorney, stood for the defense opening, she carried a confidence that made the prosecution team exchange nervous glances. "This case is about something far more sinister than murder," she announced. "It's about a conspiracy to frame an innocent man by his own brother, using corrupted evidence and purchased lies to steal an inheritance that was never rightfully his." The first witness for the defense was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a genetic cardiologist from Johns Hopkins, who had reviewed Alana's complete medical history at Hope's request. Mrs. Platt's death was absolutely consistent with genetic cardiomyopathy, Dr. Rodriguez testified with scientific authority. Her family history, genetic testing, symptom progression, and cardiac pathology all confirm natural causes. The digitalis allegedly found in her system would have been medically contraindicated for someone with her condition. Any competent physician would have known it could be fatal. "Could digitalis have been administered without medical knowledge?" Jennifer asked. "Not in the pattern claimed by the prosecution. The alleged dosing schedule would have required expert knowledge of cardiac pharmacology and careful timing that would be impossible for a layman to achieve." True took the stand next, carrying a laptop and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. "Your Honor, I'd like to present digital forensic evidence that proves the computer searches attributed to my father were planted after his arrest." The courtroom fell silent as True connected his laptop to the court's display system, filling screens with metadata analysis that looked like mathematical poetry to those who understood it. These search histories were created using a program called Timestamp Editor, which allows users to backdate digital files, True explained with engineering precision. The program was purchased and downloaded from a computer registered to Blackstone, Reynolds and Associates, my uncle's law firm, on December 15, 2023, 3 weeks before the criminal charges were filed. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the implications sank in. David's face went ashen while his attorney frantically shuffled papers with hands that shook like leaves in a hurricane. "Furthermore," True continued, "the IP address used to plant this evidence traces back to a computer owned by David Platt himself. My uncle didn't just fabricate evidence, he was careless enough to leave digital fingerprints proving he did it. Hope followed with medical evidence that destroyed Dr. Webb's credibility completely. I had my mother's original tissue samples independently tested by 3 different laboratories," she testified with the clinical precision of someone who had inherited both parents' dedication to truth. "All 3 labs found the same thing. The digitalis in those samples was introduced recently, not 11 years ago. Chemical analysis shows plant matter contamination that occurred within the last 12 months. How can you determine when the contamination occurred? Digitalis degrades over time when exposed to preservation chemicals. The concentration levels in my mother's samples are consistent with recent introduction, not historical presence. Someone added fresh digitalis to old tissue samples and hoped nobody would notice the discrepancy." The prosecution's case began crumbling like a house built on quicksand. Dr. Webb was recalled to the stand, his earlier confidence replaced by visible panic as Hope's evidence exposed his lies. "Dr. Webb," Jennifer asked with surgical precision, "did David Platt pay you $50,000 to alter your findings in this case?" "I object to the characterization. Did you receive $50,000 from David Platt?" Webb's silence was answer enough, but the twins' masterstroke came when Hope presented the original medical examiner's notes from 2012, notes that David's team thought had been destroyed years ago. Dr. James Patterson, who performed my mother's original autopsy, kept detailed personal notes that weren't included in the official file, Hope announced. These notes specifically state that tissue samples were tested for digitalis and other cardiac toxins. All tests were negative. Dr. Patterson wrote, and I quote, "No evidence of external cardiac agents. Death consistent with genetic cardiomyopathy as expected from family history." The courtroom erupted as the prosecution's entire case dissolved into exposed lies and manufactured evidence. Judge Morrison called for order while David sat frozen in horror, watching 20 years of careful planning destroyed by the children he had tried to frame as accomplices. True's final presentation was devastating in its simplicity. Bank records showing payments from David to Dr. Webb, Margaret Townsend, and 3 other witnesses. Phone logs proving coordination between conspirators. Email chains discussing the best ways to ensure Michael faces consequences for stealing what belongs to our family. "This was never about justice for my mother's death," True concluded with mathematical certainty. "This was about a man who would rather send his brother to prison for life than accept that love creates stronger family bonds than blood." When Michael took the stand in his own defense, he was no longer the broken man who had been arrested 3 months earlier. Seeing his children fight with such courage and brilliance had reminded him who he was beneath the grief and false accusations. "I loved Alana Weston with every fiber of my being," he testified, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I would have died to save her life, just as I would have died to save Catherine's. The idea that I would harm either of them is not just false, it's evil. Evil perpetrated by a man who forgot that family means protecting each other, not destroying each other for money." The jury deliberated for 37 minutes, barely long enough to elect a foreman and review the evidence of conspiracy that True and Hope had presented with devastating precision. "We find the defendant not guilty on all charges," the foreman announced. "Furthermore, we recommend immediate investigation into the perjury and evidence tampering revealed during this trial." Judge Morrison's additional ruling was swift and merciless. David Platt and Dr. Marcus Webb are remanded into custody pending criminal charges for conspiracy, perjury, and obstruction of justice. All witnesses who received payment for false testimony will face prosecution to the full extent of the law. But the real victory came when Michael walked out of that courthouse a free man, his arms around the 20-year-old warriors who had saved him from spending the rest of his life in prison for a crime he never committed. "Mr. Platt," called a reporter from the Seattle Times, "how does it feel to be vindicated?" Michael looked at True and Hope, these extraordinary young adults who had grown from homeless babies into champions of justice itself. "It feels like proof that love always wins, even when evil tries to destroy it. My children didn't just save my life. They saved the truth itself. What's next for your family?" Hope stepped forward, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had stared down corruption and emerged victorious. "We go home. We heal. We remember that family isn't about blood or money. It's about choosing to fight for each other when the world tries to tear you apart." As they walked away from the courthouse, past the cameras and chaos and crowds, Michael felt Catherine's and Alana's presence like guardian angels blessing their triumph. The children those women had helped shape had proven themselves worthy of every sacrifice, every moment of love, every lesson about loyalty and truth. That evening they stood together at Greenwood Cemetery, at the graves of the 2 women whose love had created this unbreakable family. True and Hope placed fresh flowers on both headstones, while Michael spoke to the marble markers that held his greatest losses and led to his most profound joys. "Thank you," he whispered to Catherine and Alana, "for teaching me that love is stronger than death, that family is built through choice, and that some bonds can survive any attack. Your children, because they are yours as much as mine, just proved that truth and love are more powerful than lies and greed." True took his father's right hand, Hope took his left, and together they walked toward their car as the Seattle skyline glittered with the promise of tomorrow. After 20 years of love, loss, and ultimate triumph, their family had survived everything the world could throw at them. Michael Platt was free, his children were vindicated, and their enemies were facing the justice they had tried to pervert. The homeless babies who had been found under a bridge had grown into warriors who could save the man who had first saved them. Some love stories end with death, but the greatest ones, the ones that matter most, prove that love conquers everything, even when everything seems lost. Their story was complete, their family was whole, and their future stretched ahead like an endless promise of joy, earned through surviving the unthinkable together. Forever.